Dear Redditors, what is the worst thing you have ever done? Number 1. My grandmother moved in with us when I was a teenager and started to go senile. Our relationship quickly soured. Living with her was different from sending her letters and making phone calls. It wasn't her fault. You change when you start to lose your mind. But honest to goodness, I couldn't stand her. Everything was my fault. Everything she misplaced, I stole. I must have stolen it. She couldn't accept that she just couldn't remember where she was putting things. The worst time, she had a meltdown over photos she'd misplaced and had my parents search my room while I shouted that I never touched them. I was a teenager. Why would I want her photos of the garden? I could just go outside if I wanted to see it, for sake. One night, I woke up because she was shouting for me because of her constant theft accusations. Just my name, over and over. She was in the bathroom across the hall from my room. I didn't know what time it was. I figured it was early because she always got up at like 5 a.m. I figured she was shouting for me because she misplaced something again and was happily accusing me of going into her private bathroom that I never went near and taking it. So, I thought some very angry choice words at her and pretended I didn't hear her. She called for me for 30 or so more minutes until it finally woke up my mom. I figured there, now mom can deal with you, and I can sleep. Well, turns out her kidneys had shut down. She was vomiting and excreting blood that whole time, yelling for me, not to tell me I was a little thief again, but because she needed help. She was 85. That 30 minutes probably didn't make a difference. But she died a few days later, and while I know it wasn't my fault, her extended suffering was. I'm sorry, Grandma. Number 2. Was the night manager at fast food establishment during college. There was a bitter prank rivalry between our establishment and the Subway next to us. After months of prank escalation, I crammed a rotting hamburger patty in the handle of the Subway manager's trunk lid, so he went knuckle-deep in rotting burger when he went home. That was the end of the prank war, and I've never forgiven myself for crossing the red line. Number 3. Ugh, this was an embarrassing one that I hope no one ever finds out. One night a few years ago, we get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason tonight it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever, I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note, there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. Nah, about 30 seconds after laying down I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get out of the shower even though it's an emergency, and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister. Make the 30-minute drive home. No, it was urgent. I even thought about pooping my pants and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open, and it was a super bright moonlit night. Southwest, there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed. Except for under the trampoline. My thought process was no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight and not in walking range, so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process because it was slightly raining, and the trampoline was pouring water on me. I clean up with napkins and wet wipes, come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety, and sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some poop, and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again, but thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. Number 4. Witnessed a woman pretty much break over the headless body of her son. Used to work for a mortuary livery service. I mostly picked up from retirement homes and from people's houses where they had a hospice nurse watching over them, but would occasionally get calls from the local coroner's office. One night I was sent out to a call not far from where I lived. The place was surrounded by cops. They lead me and my partner to the bathroom, where a guy had blown his head off with a shotgun in the shower. It was a mess, as you can probably imagine, but by this point it wasn't super out of the ordinary for me. I'd picked up suicides before, as well as overdoses, decomps, kids. So I was pretty numb to it. We got the guy into a bag and loaded him up at the worst possible time. The dude's mother was outside now, having been called by someone, I guess. She started hysterically screaming, which immediately put me on edge. I had dealt with crying and mourning loved ones every day. Even when I had to pick up the kid, his parents were already ushered into another room. But blood-curdling screams right in front of me. This was my first. A cop tried to grab her, but she managed to wriggle away from him, running up to the gurney and pretty much collapsing onto it, sobbing uncontrollably and babbling nonsense. It was the most raw and unfiltered emotion I had ever seen. She was clutching onto the gurney and rocking back and forth, to the point that I had to grab the cart before the whole thing toppled over onto the front lawn. I stood there for around 5 minutes, with a front row seat in unrivaled agony with no way to really hide from it, before a cop had stepped in and tried to pull her away, saying that we had to take him. She eventually relented and we got the body loaded into the car, and from there it was business as usual. The reason that one stuck with me so much is because, well, it was almost like looking into my own future. I was suicidal at the time, and a shotgun in the shower was exactly how I planned to do it. The only reason I was waiting was because I wanted to be in my own place, so my roommate didn't have to find me. The dude was even around my age. It was a weird feeling, almost like standing over my own body, and when I saw the woman's breakdown, I could only see my own mom. It was at that moment that I decided that my mom would never scream and cry like that because of something I did. While the feelings are still there and I still think about death a lot, that night was when I decided that I would never do it, no matter how much it hurts. Number 5. Surgical tech here. One of my patients was at the very tail end of pregnancy, but the baby wound up dying. She was in denial, and refused care, and carried the dead baby for almost a month. I was on the team to get her a C-section when she finally came to get it out. The baby's skin was like wet paper, any pressure anywhere caused it to tear. The muscles underneath had started to rot. The bones were mostly broken down to the point of providing no structure, so it moved like a baby-shaped water balloon. Face looked like something from a horror movie. The smell was easily the worst I've experienced. The room was eerie silent, including the mother who was awake, which is normal for C-sections. Been in surgical tech for over 6 years, and that was by far the worst thing I've ever seen or done. That case was almost 4 years ago, and still pops into my mind regularly. Number 6. My hometown is generally middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods, and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the kids that weren't as wealthy. That prick grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest fucking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and lap the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony, while people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard, and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks and his family, but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News came out later and we found out the party we bombed was a wake for his late grandfather. Number 7. When I was about 15, a neighbor of ours stopped us in the road and chewed us out for riding our go-karts in the road. This even though it was a dirt road in a rural area, which was the perfect place for riding go-karts. He was a complete prick about it too. I don't know where I got the idea from, but I promptly went home, called the electric company, pretended to be the neighbor, and told them I wanted my electricity turned off as we were moving. It was the 80s, so they just looked the account up by name and address and promptly entered my request in the system. I'm sure it was just a minor inconvenience for them, but they deserved it in my opinion. Number 8. One time, a girl I had minimal interest in, but had mutual shared friends with, had sent me a text basically saying, "I have feelings for you, and I'd like to explore where that takes us." I then typed up a message to my good friend saying, "Please kill me now, I think she wants a relationship." Keep in mind, this girl was nice and all, but just wasn't my type. I'm also a people pleaser, so the thought of having to turn down someone makes me uncomfortable, and I dreaded having to tell her I wasn't interested. I've been turned down before. It sucks. I don't want to do that to someone else. I did not mean the "please kill me now" as a knock on her as a person, but as a "I don't want to be in this situation." You can probably guess what happened though. Yep, I sent the "please kill me now" text to the girl. After immediately realizing what I did and thinking for about 30 seconds how I could possibly talk my way out of not sounding like the biggest jerk in the entire world, I realized that there was no good way to spin that. I decided to just try my best to explain to her that it wasn't meant to be mean and blah blah blah. I also said that she didn't deserve that blah blah blah. Number 9. My grandpa retired early due to disability and watched me during the day all summer until I was 11 to 12 and could chill alone after school. He spoiled the crap out of me. Took me to amusement parks, brought me to toy stores, all sorts of stuff. My parents told him to dial it back because I was being an entitled piece of crap to them when I was 6 to 7. After this happened, I told my grandpa I wanted to go to the amusement park one day. He told me that my parents said no, but maybe we could go next week or the week after. I got incredibly upset. Being the manipulative sociopath I was, I put on the waterworks. He just said he was sorry and that he didn't want to upset my parents. So, I looked at him and said, "You just don't love me anymore, do you?" He got really sad after I said that and told me that he loved me very much, but we couldn't go. So, I just kept going. "Why don't you love me?" Every time I said it, he got more and more distraught. Then he started to cry. I made my 56-year-old grandfather cry. The sweetest man I've ever known. The image of him crying while saying, "Please don't say things like that," is so deeply seared in my mind. I think it was one of the most important moments of my childhood as far as my emotional development. At the time I couldn't process it immediately. I didn't even apologize, I just went to my room. He didn't even tell my parents what happened. My mom said that around that time, it seemed like I matured a decade. I was quiet, polite, and incredibly well-behaved. I treated my grandpa much nicer from that point forward. I couldn't bring myself to apologize for it until in my late teens when he was dying of cancer, and I found out that he wasn't even blood related to me. He was my mom's stepdad. Just one of the best people humanity could offer, and I owe so much of who I've become to him. Number 10. This is a story of revenge. I've never told it before. It's fucked up, but I still think I was justified. Many years ago, I lived in Japan, where the English school business is a big business. A good friend of mine had put years of work into developing his own curriculum. I was his head teacher and helped develop several original, educational textbooks for kids. He was ready to launch his school, but he needed financial backing because trying to incorporate in Japan, as a foreigner, is close to impossible. He found a local businessman to help finance the operation. My friend put down $50,000 and the local businessman put down $51,000, giving him controlling share. I'm not sure exactly what happened. All I know is that the local businessman basically pulled out at the last minute and stole the $50,000 from my friend, and there was nothing my friend could do. This local businessman then decided to open the school entirely on his own and cut my friend out using the material I had designed. This local businessman had never met me and didn't know that I existed, so my friend suggested that I reply to his advertisement in the newspaper, looking for a head teacher, and try to get hired so we could bring the school down from the inside. I did, and I was hired as the head teacher, and was put in charge of setting up all the classrooms, getting all the supplementary books, all the toys, games, setting up the class schedules, and even setting up all the computers and software needed to run the business. Literally everything. I spent 3 months preparing to launch the school, building the curriculum, printing flyers, talking to parents of the kids and signing them up for classes, the whole 9 yards. But 2 days before the school was set to open, I got my revenge. I threw all the computers into the garbage bin, which was collected the next day, and changed all the passwords for all the cloud services. I then threw out my cell phone and disappeared. Because this guy was sketchy, he had always wanted to pay me in cash, so he didn't have my bank information, didn't have my actual mailing address, and I gave him a fake one to start. So, when I disappeared, He literally had no way to know who I was or how to find me. I found out through the grapevine later that this wound up costing that local businessman several $100,000 as he needed to pull cash from his other businesses to refinance this one and basically start from scratch. He missed the beginning of the school year and all the parents that he had contracted with were pissed and cancelled, and he was never able to recoup them as clients. Basically, I cost him an entire year. I don't regret it for a second, because this guy stole $50,000 from my friend, and basically took advantage of some young entrepreneurs who were just trying to get their business started. He got what he deserved, and I now have a backstory as a corporate saboteur. Number 11. 8th grade, it was the last week of school and we had to turn in our end of the year history assignment. Now I was very lazy with school stuff but would also get grounded if I got bad grades. I procrastinated so badly to the point there wasn't really a way out of it. One day in class, our teacher tells us he has a stack of history projects that were turned in that didn't have a name on them. I got a light bulb. I go over to the stack and find a project on Civil War era weaponry like cannons and stuff. The funny thing was, it did have a name on it, it was just written in pencil on black paper and hard to see. I erased the name, put my name on it and turned it in. Never got caught. Number 12. I took a crap in my sister's cat's litter box when I was 13. She is 5 years older than me and has always been a bigger girl. She was the golden child and got everything she wanted. I'm quiet and keep to myself a lot. She would take my panties and have her period in them and then give them back to me stained. Just to give you an idea of how bad she was. I would complain to my parents, but they would just brush me off, give her a slap on the wrist, and ignore it otherwise. She kept taking my stuff, breaking it on purpose, and stretching out my clothes. I had finally had enough, but I didn't really know what to do to get back at her. She had this cat. She loved this cat so damn much and took really good care of it. One day, she was scooping the litter box, and I was asking her to give me my stuff back. She just ignored me like usual. I was furious. Got that, seeing red, do something dumb in the moment, mad. I don't know if my bowels agreed or if the planets had aligned just right, but as soon as she left the room I looked down at that box and thought to myself, I'm going to make her clean my shit. I proceeded to have the biggest little kid poop in that box. One of those ones that looked like a 300-pound biker named Jim laid it. It was obviously not cat poop. I was freaked out when I saw it, thought I would do a little poo, pass it off as the cat, and get my giggles knowing she scooped it. I refused to back down this time. My sister was going to scoop that shit. I waited days for the shoe to finally drop, and nothing. No word was said. No terrified scream from the laundry room. No vet visit for a cat's ruptured butthole. I guess she scooped the poop. She didn't stop terrorizing me until she moved out 5 years later, but every time she did, I would always remember she scooped that poop, and it made it a little more bearable. Number 13. My buddy and I were around 8 and we were being watched by a neighbor. We somehow got our hands on several boxes of matchbooks, so we started building rockets out of aluminum foil filled with match heads. When we didn't have enough to build any more rockets, we each took the last few packs of matches and started flinging them at each other, ripping off the match head and then firing it off the striker on the matchbook cover. We were chasing each other around the yard and got near another neighbor's house. They had one of those roll-up wooden reed sunscreens, the ones they now make out of plastic. A match got wedged between the reeds and started burning. Before we knew it was 1 inch around, 3 inches around, 6 inches around, and it wouldn't go out. Pretty soon the screen was burning from the bottom up, and soon, the house. We ran and got a garden hose and somehow managed to extinguish it with only half the screen burned. We then went back to the house where we were supposed to be being watched and turned on the TV, until the fire department showed up. Being 8, we tried to deny it until they pointed out our wet pant legs and the ashes still on our shoes. I'll be asked, so we got out of it. The neighbor did not press charges, but my dad paid for the repairs and pressed me with a belt, as it was back in the day. I don't backjudge him in 2023. I must admit that the punishment and the fact that we could have burned somebody's house down sharpened my sense of what was right and wrong and that my actions could have an impact on other people. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe and be sure to have a great day.